Welcome to Revenge Mountain, where quiet decisions speak louder than screaming matches. Before we get into today's story, let me ask you something. How have you been lately? Like, really been? Have you ever been in a relationship where someone kept threatening to leave? Not because they meant it, but because they knew it would make you panic, chase, and prove you still cared? That's exactly what today's story is about. A 7-year marriage, 11 I'm leaving moments, and the one time she finally responded with a single word that changed everything. If stories about emotional manipulation, wake-up moments, and calm, calculated payback are your thing, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's get into it. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 36 years old, and for 7 years, I was married to a man who knew exactly how to leave without ever actually going. The text arrived while I was at work, halfway through a Tuesday that had started like any other. Coffee gone cold on my desk, an unread email blinking in the corner of my screen, the low, steady hum of a meeting room down the hall. Nothing dramatic, nothing that hinted my life was about to tilt on its axis. I'm moving out again. This time it's permanent. Don't try to stop me. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, long enough for the words to lose their sharp edges and become familiar shapes, long enough for my body to prepare for a reaction that didn't come. Again, that word didn't need to be written. It hovered there anyway, heavy and implied, like we both knew exactly what this was. We always did. For most people, a message like that would hit like a car crash. Panic, adrenaline. That hollow drop in the chest that makes your hands shake and your thoughts scatter. That had been my reaction the first time, the second time, the third. Honestly, I lost count after a while, though part of me hated that I ever needed to count at all. But this time was different. This time something inside me stayed quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up too fast or rush to the bathroom to breathe through the familiar dizziness. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I didn't replay the last conversation we'd had, searching for the moment I'd messed up, the word I should have chosen more carefully, the tone that might have pushed him over some invisible edge. There was no edge anymore, just a flat, exhausted calm. I read the text again, slower this time. Permanent. Don't try to stop me. He'd used those exact words before, or close enough that the meaning was identical. A declaration designed to sound final while leaving just enough room for negotiation, just enough space for me to panic, to reach out, to prove, yet again, that I cared enough to chase him when he pulled away. In the past, my fingers would have hovered over the keyboard, already forming apologies I didn't understand, promises I couldn't define. I would have asked what I'd done wrong. I would have begged him to talk to me, to come home, to please not do this again. Again. Instead, I typed one word. Okay. I didn't add punctuation. I didn't soften it with a question mark or dress it up with concern. I didn't explain myself. I just sent it and watched the message turn blue. For a second, I wondered if I'd made a mistake, not because I wanted to take it back, but because it felt so unfamiliar to respond without bracing for impact, like stepping onto a stair you expect to be there and realizing the ground doesn't drop. Then I locked my phone and went back to my meeting. I don't remember what anyone said for the next half hour. I nodded when appropriate, took notes I never looked at again. From the outside, I probably seemed fine, focused, professional, the same woman I'd been an hour earlier. Inside, something had shifted, not loudly, not violently, but decisively, like a switch finally flipping after years of flickering on and off. He didn't respond for almost an hour. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't reach for it immediately. I finished the sentence I was typing, saved the document, took a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That's it? That's all you have to say? I read the message once, then again. There it was, the confusion, the crack in the script. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to argue, to plead, to ask him to stay. My role had always been clear, and for the first time, I wasn't playing it. I didn't reply. At lunch, while my coworkers talked about weekend plans and a birthday cake in the break room fridge, I stepped outside and called a locksmith. My voice sounded steady, even to my own ears, as I explained I needed all the locks changed on my house that afternoon. He asked a few practical questions. Address, type of locks, time frame. Can you be there by 4? I asked. I can be there by 4:15, he said. That works. When I hung up, I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, the city moving around me like nothing important had happened. Cars passed. Someone laughed nearby. Life, apparently, was continuing just fine. I left work early, telling my boss I had a family emergency. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the kind of emergency people expect. The drive home felt surreal. I'd made that drive thousands of times, often with my mind already racing ahead to whatever mood my husband might be in when I walked through the door. Would he be distant, overly affectionate, quiet in that tight, brittle way that warned me something was coming? That day, the house was empty and quiet. The house had always been mine. I bought it 3 years before we got married, a modest place in a neighborhood that felt safe and forgettable in the best way. I'd paid off the mortgage early with an inheritance from my grandmother, a fact that had come up more than once over the years, usually framed as a joke, sometimes not. His name had never been on the deed. We'd talked about changing that, or rather, he'd brought it up, and I'd said we could discuss it later. Later had a way of never arriving. I pulled boxes from the garage and started packing. I didn't rush. I didn't slam drawers or throw anything. I folded his clothes carefully, stacked his books, wrapped fragile items in towels, even his collection of things I'd never understood, gadgets, souvenirs, odds and ends he insisted had meaning, I handled with the same quiet efficiency. This wasn't anger. This was acceptance. The locksmith arrived at 4:15 on the dot. He was polite, efficient, and blessedly uninterested in my personal life. By 5:30, every lock had been changed. He handed me 4 new keys. I paid him in cash and watched his truck disappear down the street. I stacked the boxes neatly in the garage and sent one final text. Your belongings are in the garage. You can pick them up any time before Sunday evening. Then I ordered dinner and sat on my couch, staring at the blank television screen, waiting. Not with dread, but with a strange, detached curiosity, for him to realize that this time I meant it. Whatever came next, I already knew one thing for certain. I wasn't chasing him anymore. By the time my husband pulled into the driveway that night, I already knew how the story was supposed to go. I'd lived some version of it 11 times. The first time he ever threatened to leave, we'd been married less than a year. We'd argued about something small, so small I honestly couldn't remember it clearly anymore. Maybe money, maybe his tone, maybe the way he dismissed something I cared about with a shrug and a joke that wasn't really a joke. What I did remember was the way his voice had gone flat when he said it. Maybe we rushed into this, he'd told me, standing in the kitchen with his keys already in his hand. Maybe we shouldn't be married at all. I'd laughed at first, a startled, nervous laugh, because people didn't say things like that unless they meant them, and I didn't believe he meant it. Not really. Then he'd walked out. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, phone in my hand, replaying every word of our argument, convinced I'd missed something obvious. By morning, I'd called him 12 times and texted even more. I apologized. I promised I'd listen better. I asked him to come home so we could talk like adults. 2 days later, he did. He showed up looking tired and wounded, like he'd barely survived something brutal. He said he'd needed space, that he'd felt overwhelmed, that he loved me, but marriage was hard, and sometimes he just needed to know I still wanted him. I believed him. That was the beginning. The second time, I cried sooner. The third time, I cried faster. By the fourth, I'd stopped pretending I was surprised. I started recognizing the pattern even as I stayed trapped inside it. There was always an argument. Sometimes it was real, resentment building, words said too sharply, unresolved issues that never stayed resolved. Other times it was almost laughably small, a forgotten errand, a tone he didn't like, a look on my face he decided meant judgment. Then came the escalation. I can't do this anymore. You're impossible to live with. I don't think this marriage is healthy. And finally, the line that landed like a threat and a promise all at once. I'm leaving. He'd pack a bag, sometimes dramatically, slamming drawers and muttering under his breath, sometimes quietly, like he wanted to look noble about it. He'd stay with his sister, or his mother, once with a friend from work, anywhere that wasn't here, anywhere that made sure I knew he could go. The length of his absences varied. 2 days, a week, almost 2 weeks, once. Long enough for me to break down. Long enough for me to send messages that grew more frantic as time passed. I'm sorry. Can we please talk? I miss you. I'll do better. Please come home. When he returned, it was always on his terms. He'd say things like, I didn't know if you cared, or I needed to see if you'd fight for us. Sometimes he'd cry. Sometimes he'd accuse me of pushing him away. And every time, somehow, I ended up apologizing for making him feel like leaving was his only option. After the third time, I started keeping track. Not in a dramatic way, not with dates circled in red or long journal entries, just a note on my phone, a simple tally. I told myself it was for perspective, so I wouldn't exaggerate, so I wouldn't gaslight myself into thinking it was worse than it was. But the number kept climbing. 5, 7, 9. By the time we hit 11, the act had lost its power, at least on the surface. Friends would ask how things were going, and I'd smile and say, "We're working on things." Family would comment on how strong we were for sticking it out, how marriage took effort. What they didn't see was how small my world had become. I learned to anticipate his moods, learned which topics to avoid, learned when to back down, when to soothe, when to apologize, even if I didn't fully understand what I was apologizing for. I stopped bringing up things that mattered to me because they so often turned into proof that I was too much. And every time he left, a part of me broke just a little more, but another part adapted. I became very good at surviving uncertainty. What I didn't realize then was that survival had quietly replaced partnership. Last Tuesday, when his text lit up my phone, "I'm moving out again. This time it's permanent." My body responded before my emotions could catch up. It didn't panic because it had learned this drill too well. This wasn't new. This was muscle memory. But something else was different too. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of him leaving. I was tired of him coming back. As I sat on my couch that evening, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I'd bent myself into knots trying to protect. I finally allowed myself to think a thought I'd pushed away for years. If someone keeps threatening to leave you over and over again, maybe what they really want isn't distance. Maybe what they want is power. And maybe the only way to break that cycle is to stop reacting at all. When the doorbell finally rang later that night, sharp and insistent, I didn't jump. I glanced at the clock. 8:47 p.m. Right on schedule. I muted the television and stayed seated on the couch, remote still in my hand, listening as the sound echoed through the house. One ring turned into 3. Then knocking. Then the unmistakable thud of a fist hitting wood, harder each time, as if volume alone could force compliance. "Evelyn," he shouted, "open the door. I know you're in there." I stayed where I was. There was a strange clarity in that moment. Not courage, not defiance, just certainty. The kind that settles in when you finally stop arguing with reality. For 7 years, that door had always opened eventually. Tonight it didn't. I stood only when the knocking turned frantic. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be precise. I walked to the door slowly, deliberately, and spoke through the thick wood separating us. "Your things are in the garage," I said. "The code is 7734. There was silence on the other side, then confusion. "What do you mean my things are in the garage?" "You said you were moving out permanently," I replied. My voice didn't shake. "I helped you move out." "That's not what I meant," he snapped. "You can't just— Evelyn, open the door. This is my home." "No," I said, "it's mine." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were factual. The house was in my name. Bought before we married. Paid off years ago. A detail that had always hovered in the background of our arguments. Unspoken, but understood. He tried a different angle then. His voice softened, slipped into something almost reasonable. "I was upset. You know how I get. I needed space." "You said it was permanent," I answered. "You said you'd already talked to a lawyer." Another pause. "I didn't mean it like that." "That's exactly how you meant it," I said. "Those were your words." The shouting that followed was impressive. Creative, even. Accusations layered on top of insults, disbelief morphing into rage as he realized I wasn't backing down. I recognized every tactic: shock, guilt, outrage. Each one a familiar step in a dance we'd performed too many times before. About 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the front of the house. His sister's car. I watched from the window as she climbed out, already gesturing wildly, already primed for battle. Together they stood on my porch, voices raised, performing outrage for an audience that wasn't there. I didn't open the door. Eventually, I heard the garage door open. The sound was almost anticlimactic, metal lifting, echoes in the empty space. I stayed on the couch and finished my dinner while they loaded boxes into her SUV. My phone buzzed constantly on the coffee table. Text after text after text. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I already knew the progression. Anger, threats, disbelief, a demand to talk, an insistence that I was being unfair. When the garage door finally closed and their car pulled away, the house felt different. Not lighter, not happier, just settled, like something unstable had finally stopped rattling. I walked into the garage and changed the code. That night, I slept through the dark without waking to check my phone. The next morning, at exactly 7 a.m., someone pounded on my front door with enough force to rattle the frame. I knew who it was before I even looked. When I opened the door, my mother-in-law stood there, arms crossed, eyes sharp with indignation. "You need to let my son come home," she said, without so much as a greeting. "Right now." I smiled just a little. "Good morning to you, too." She didn't appreciate that. Her mouth tightened. "Don't get smart with me. He made a mistake. He didn't mean what he said. You know how he gets." I did know how he got. That was the problem. "Marriage is about forgiveness," she continued, "about working through things. You don't just throw someone out because they had emotions." I met her gaze steadily. "Your son has left me permanently 11 times in 7 years," I said. "I forgave him 11 times. I begged him to come back 11 times. This time, I took him at his word." Her expression shifted, cycling through disbelief, anger, and something close to panic. "You can't do this," she said. "He has rights. He told me he was leaving. He told me he'd talk to a lawyer. If he wants to pursue this legally, he's welcome to." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but I don't think so." She left a few minutes later, not before delivering a final, cutting remark about how I was just like my father, a man she'd never met and knew nothing about. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was a voicemail. His best friend. I listened to the message once, then saved it. Something told me it wouldn't be the last time I needed proof of how far people would go to protect a story that made sense to them. He came back that evening alone. No sister, no audience, no raised voice echoing down the street. When the doorbell rang this time, it was softer, almost hesitant. I didn't answer it right away. I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing a mug that didn't need rinsing, letting the sound sit between us. When I finally walked to the door, I didn't open it. "Evelyn," he said. His voice was hoarse, thinner than I'd ever heard it. "Can we just talk?" "We can talk," I replied, resting my hand against the doorframe. "You can talk from there." There was a pause. I imagined him standing on the porch, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. He always did that when he wanted to look smaller than he was. "This is ridiculous," he said, but without conviction. "I'm your husband." "You said you were leaving permanently," I said. "You said you'd already talked to a lawyer." Silence. "Were you lying about the lawyer?" I asked. "Nothing." "Were you lying about leaving permanently?" The quiet stretched, long enough to become an answer all on its own. Finally, he exhaled. I was upset. "Upset about what?" I asked. "We weren't fighting," he said quickly, like he was trying to convince himself. "We watched a movie the night before. You fell asleep on my shoulder. Everything was fine. I needed space." "For what?" I pressed. Another pause, then softer. "I needed to know you still cared." There it was. The admission landed between us like something fragile finally set down after years of being handled too roughly. I closed my eyes, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything I'd been circling for so long. "So you threatened to leave me," I said slowly, "to see if I'd chase you." "That's not—" He stopped himself, restarted. "You're making it sound worse than it was." "That's exactly what you just described." "I love you," he said, desperation creeping in. "I just needed to feel like you loved me too." I leaned my forehead against the door. "I showed you I loved you every day for 7 years," I said. "That wasn't enough. You needed drama. You needed me panicking. You needed me begging you not to go." "That's not fair," he said, his voice breaking. "I was fighting for us." "No," I said quietly. "You were testing me." He started crying then. Real tears. The kind that used to undo me instantly. I waited for the familiar pull in my chest, the instinct to comfort him, to open the door and make it better. It didn't come. "So that's it?" he asked after a moment. 7 years just nothing? 7 years means a lot, I said. It means I spent 7 years trying to be enough for someone who kept moving the goalposts. It means I'm done playing a game I never agreed to. He stood there a few minutes longer, breathing unevenly, hoping, waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. Eventually, he walked away. That night, I finally read the messages he'd sent over the past few days. There were 63 of them. They moved through emotional whiplash so fast it made my head spin. "You're really not going to call me? This is immature. Fine. Be that way. I can't believe you actually changed the locks. You're going to feel stupid when you realize what you've done. I'm coming home tomorrow, and you better fix this. Why won't you answer me? I'm sorry. Okay, is that what you want? Please just call me. I miss you. I hate you. I love you. Please don't do this. I set the phone down, exhausted, just reading it. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. He told me things I didn't want to hear. Even though the house was mine before the marriage, even though it was paid off with inheritance money, my husband could still be entitled to a portion of its appreciated value. Depending on circumstances, I might also owe spousal support. I felt sick hearing the numbers. But I also felt something else. Relief. Let's start the process, I told him. 2 weeks later, my husband was served divorce papers at his sister's apartment. According to my lawyer, he screamed so loudly the neighbors called the police, thinking someone was being attacked. His response was to hire his own attorney, someone known for aggressive advocacy in unfair divorce situations. His family helped pay the retainer. From what I heard through mutual friends, the story they were telling anyone who would listen was simple and damning. I had suddenly and without warning thrown my husband out of his home. I stopped defending myself. The people who knew me knew the truth. The ones who didn't weren't worth correcting. Then came the deposition. My attorney had advised me to document everything, so I brought it all. The texts, the timestamps, the saved voicemail from his best friend accusing me of emotional abuse for taking his words literally. When his attorney started painting me as controlling and cruel, my lawyer slid the evidence across the table. All 11 I'm leaving incidents. His written admission that he'd been testing me. And finally, the crown jewel, a group chat screenshot forwarded to me by someone who'd decided I deserved to know the truth. In it, my husband bragged about his strategy. Make her sweat, let her panic. Then I'll come back and she'll be grateful. The room went very quiet. His attorney's face as he read it was almost worth everything that came before. My husband's face when he realized I had it was even better. Where did you get that? He demanded. One of your friends thought I should know, I said. Who? His voice was sharp with betrayal. Who would do that to me? The irony of him using that word wasn't lost on me. The mediation was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, but the war started long before we ever sat in the same room. It unfolded quietly at first, through sideways comments and half-formed stories that reached me through other people. Mutual friends, distant relatives, coworkers who suddenly looked at me a little too carefully when my name came up. Apparently, I was a monster now. According to the version circulating through his family, I had snapped without warning. I'd locked him out in a moment of cold cruelty. I'd thrown his things into boxes like trash. I'd left him homeless and traumatized, blindsided by a woman he thought loved him. What they didn't say, what they carefully edited out, was the text message. The word again. The 11 times before. I found out just how distorted the narrative had become when his aunt cornered me in a grocery store parking lot. I don't know how you can live with yourself, she said, arms folded tight across her chest. After everything he's been through. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd in that hollow, disorienting way where reality and fiction collide. I'm living just fine, I said, and walked away. His lawyer leaned hard into the story during preliminary calls, painted my actions as calculated and vindictive, suggested I'd been waiting for an excuse to assert power, that I'd manipulated him into leaving so I could humiliate him. I listened without interrupting. My attorney listened too, calm, patient, almost bored, because we had something they didn't, a paper trail. Every threat to leave, every dramatic declaration, every I need space that somehow always ended with me begging and apologizing. When mediation finally began, the room felt heavy with expectation. My husband sat across from me, shoulders squared, jaw set like he was bracing for a fight. He didn't look at me, not once. His attorney spoke first, laid out their demands with confidence bordering on arrogance, spousal support, a claim to the house's increased value, compensation for emotional distress, the implication that I'd destroyed his stability, his trust, his sense of safety. Then it was my attorney's turn. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, dates, times, patterns so obvious they almost embarrassed me in hindsight. 11 messages that all said some version of I'm leaving, 11 disappearances, 11 returns, each one following my apologies. Then came the texts where my husband admitted he'd been testing me, where he said he needed to see if I'd fight for him. Then the voicemail. His best friend's voice filled the room, tinny through a small speaker. You're being emotionally abusive by taking his words literally, he said. You know what he really meant. I watched my husband flinch as his own defense collapsed under the weight of his words and the people who'd tried to protect him. And then, finally, the group chat. The mediator leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly as she read. My husband shifted in his seat. His attorney stopped talking. No one needed to explain it. The strategy was there in plain text. The control, the manipulation, the satisfaction. The room went quiet again, heavier this time. The mediator cleared her throat. I think, she said carefully, we need to reassess expectations. What followed was exhausting. His attorney pushed for spousal support, claiming my husband had sacrificed career opportunities for our marriage, that he'd stayed in a job he disliked to maintain stability for us, that he'd put my needs first. My attorney countered with facts. He'd been employed continuously. He'd been promoted twice. Our incomes were comparable. The house had been purchased and paid off before the marriage. He'd contributed nothing to the mortgage. And layered through all of it was the evidence of emotional manipulation. Years of it, documented and undeniable. The mediator looked tired by the end, not sympathetic, just worn down by the sheer volume of nonsense that had finally been stripped of its polish. The settlement, when it came, felt almost anticlimactic. He got nothing from the house. I agreed to pay him $300 a month in spousal support for 12 months, a token amount that allowed his attorney to claim a win without rewarding the behavior that brought us here. He kept his car, his retirement accounts, his personal belongings. I kept the house, and something far more valuable. When the terms were yet allowed, my husband stared at the table like it had personally betrayed him. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He'd expected leverage, control, a final twist in his favor. Instead, he got consequences. As we stood to sign the papers, he finally looked at me. Not angry, not sad. Confused. I really thought you'd come around, he said quietly. You always did. I met his gaze evenly. That was before I realized I wasn't being loved, I said. I was being managed. He didn't have a response. Outside the attorney's office, his mother was waiting. She launched into me the moment she saw us. Accusations. Blame. A familiar refrain about how I'd destroyed her son. I listened, then said the same thing I'd said from the beginning. He told me he was leaving permanently. I took him at his word. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, his sister, standing a few feet away, didn't join in. She looked down at the pavement, jaw tight, like maybe something had finally clicked. Let's go, my husband said to them, sharp and embarrassed. As I walked to my car, I heard his mother say, Don't worry, sweetheart. You'll find someone better. Someone who deserves you. I almost laughed. Almost. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, my life had grown almost unrecognizable. Not in big, cinematic ways. There was no dramatic makeover, no sudden relocation, no grand declaration of reinvention. The change came softly, in the absence of things I hadn't realized were weighing me down. The house was quiet. Good quiet. Not the hollow kind that echoes with loneliness, but the steady, breathable kind that lets your shoulders drop when you walk through the door. No more bracing myself before turning the key. No more scanning the room for signs of an impending mood. No more wondering which version of my husband I'd get that evening. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, moving the couch to face the window instead of the television. I painted the bedroom a color I actually liked, a muted green that felt calm instead of compromised. I turned the spare room into a home office, something I'd talked about for years, but never done because it wasn't the right time. Apparently, the right time had been waiting for me to be alone. I started seeing a therapist. I told people that with a half smile, like it was a joke. Yeah, I'm seeing a therapist. Sue me. But the truth was, it saved me from repeating the same story in a different form. She listened without interrupting as I described the cycle, the leaving, the coming back, the apologies that were always mine. When I finished, she nodded slowly. There's a term from what you experience, she said. It's called intermittent reinforcement. She explained it clinically, calmly. The unpredictability, the way affection becomes a reward doled out inconsistently, how the highs feel intoxicating precisely because the lows are so painful, how the brain gets addicted to relief. It felt like someone had finally handed me a map to a place I'd been lost in for years. That's why you stayed, she said gently, not because you were weak, because you were conditioned. That mattered more than I expected. I heard through mutual friends that my ex-husband had been telling anyone who'd listen that he'd dodged a bullet, that I'd been controlling all along, that he was finally free and happier than ever. His social media reflected that story perfectly. Quotes about healing, self-worth, and learning to walk away from toxicity. I blocked him everywhere. What surprised me was how little it bothered me. I didn't feel the urge to correct the narrative. I didn't feel defensive. People who mattered already knew who I was. The rest were background noise. I ran into one of our mutual friends at the grocery store one afternoon. She looked uncomfortable at first, like she wasn't sure which version of the story she was supposed to believe. "Hey," I said, "how have you been?" "Good," she replied, then hesitated. "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't really know the whole story." "Not many people did," I said. She nodded. "I saw those screenshots, the group chat. I can't believe he talked about you like that." "Yeah," I said, that was a fun discovery." "For what it's worth," she added quietly, "I don't think he ever understood what he had. Nothing was ever enough for him." I smiled, small and sincere. "I know." We talked for a few more minutes, then went our separate ways. It felt like closure I hadn't known I needed. The spousal support payment started the following month. $300, automatically transferred. I set it up so I wouldn't have to think about it. It was less than I'd spent over the years trying to keep him happy. Little treats, impulsive trips, peace offerings disguised as generosity. At least this had an end date. My lawyer called one afternoon to tell me my ex-husband's attorney had tried to appeal the settlement, claiming I'd hidden assets. The judge dismissed it almost immediately. "Apparently," my lawyer said dryly, "claiming hidden assets requires evidence that assets were actually hidden." I laughed for the first time in days. Life settled into a rhythm. Work, therapy, evenings spent reading or cooking meals I didn't have to negotiate. Friends I drifted away from slowly reappeared. One admitted he'd tried to say something years ago and backed off when I got defensive. "I'm just glad you finally woke up," he said. "Me too," I replied. One night, sitting on my couch with a glass of wine and the windows open, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "I made a mistake. I know that now. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a moment. No anger, no surge of emotion, just recognition. I blocked the number without responding. Some doors, once closed, need to stay that way. The house was quiet again. No tests, no threats, no one waiting to see if I'd react correctly. I thought about what he'd said during the divorce, that he'd always believed I'd come around. And he was right. I always had. Because I thought love meant endurance. That commitment was measured by how much you could take and still stay. Now I know better. Love isn't about suffering. It isn't about proving you'll chase someone who keeps running. It's about two people choosing each other without fear, without games, without constant tests of loyalty. This version of my life, the quiet one, the steady one, isn't dramatic, but it's peaceful. And that's enough. If I thought the hardest part was over once the papers were signed, I was wrong. The divorce ended the marriage. It didn't end the consequences. What followed was quieter, subtler, but in some ways more revealing than everything that came before. The first aftershock came through other people. Friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out. Some cautiously, some awkwardly, some clearly unsure which version of the story they were allowed to believe. "I didn't know what to say," one woman admitted over coffee. "He made it sound like you just snapped." I nodded. I wasn't offended. I understood how convincing he could be when he needed to be. "He told people I locked him out without warning," she continued, "that you changed overnight." "I didn't change overnight," I said calmly. "I stopped reacting." That distinction mattered. Word traveled slowly but steadily. Not because I defended myself, because I didn't, but because people started comparing notes, stories that didn't quite line up, emotional reactions that felt rehearsed, details that shifted depending on the audience. The second aftershock came from his family. His mother stopped calling altogether after the settlement. His sister didn't. She sent one message, short and stiff. "I didn't understand it before. I do now. I'm sorry." I read it twice, then once more. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of honesty. Some realizations arrive too late to rebuild trust, even if they're sincere. The third aftershock came from him. He didn't contact me directly, not at first. Instead, he tried orbiting, showing up in places he knew I'd be. Mentioning my name in conversations meant to reach me indirectly, asking mutual friends if I was doing okay. Concern disguised as relevance. I ignored all of it, because I finally understood something crucial. Distance was the only language that ever stopped him. The house continued to change with me. I donated furniture we'd picked out together, cleared closets that had once felt crowded with compromise. Each small decision felt like reclaiming space, not just physically, but mentally. I wasn't rebuilding. I was unlearning. And the more distance I put between myself and the marriage, the clearer one truth became. He hadn't lost control because I was cruel. He lost control because I was no longer available to be controlled. The message came on a Sunday night. A new number. I almost ignored it, but something in me was curious, not hopeful. Curious in the way you are when you already know the ending, but want to see how someone else tells it. I've been thinking a lot. I know I didn't handle things right. I think therapy is helping me understand my patterns. I just want closure. Closure. That word had become a favorite among people who wanted access without accountability. I didn't respond. An hour later, another message arrived. I'm not asking to get back together. I just want to talk. There it was. The familiar softening, the careful framing. Not demanding, not threatening. Reasonable. The version of him designed to bypass my defenses. I stared at the screen for a long time. 7 years earlier, I would have answered instantly. I would have felt responsible for his discomfort, for his confusion, for his need to feel resolved. Now I felt something different. Detachment. Because closure, I'd learned, is not something another person gives you. It's something you decide you no longer need from them. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. In the end, I sent nothing. 10 minutes later, the tone changed. So that's it? You won't even talk to me? There it was again. The test. I blocked the number. That was the last attempt. I heard later, from someone who shouldn't have told me, that he spiraled after that. Not dramatically, not publicly, but internally. The kind of spiral that happens when a person realizes their old strategies don't work anymore. He'd told people I was cold, that I'd changed, that I'd shut him out. They weren't wrong. I had. Because emotional access is a privilege, not a right earned through history. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsed conversations in my head, no imaginary arguments. Just rest. People keep asking me if I regret how I handled it. Not the divorce, that part is obvious. But the lock change, the silence, the refusal to meet him halfway one last time. They ask it carefully, like they're expecting guilt. I don't feel any. For 7 years, I bent myself into shapes that made someone else comfortable. I apologized for reactions that were reasonable. I chased after threats that were never meant to be real. I learned to confuse anxiety with love and chaos with passion. That one text, okay, was the first time I treated his words as final instead of emotional currency. And apparently that was unforgivable. Because in his version of love, my job was to chase forever, to prove my devotion by never letting him go, to panic on cue. No thanks. The house is quiet tonight. I'm sitting on the couch, lights low, windows open. The city hums outside, distant and steady. My phone hasn't buzzed in hours. No one is testing me. No one is threatening to leave. No one is waiting to see if I'll react correctly. I think about who I was at the beginning of that marriage. How certain I was that love meant endurance, that staying, no matter the cost, was proof of character. Now I know better. Love isn't measured by how much pain you tolerate. It isn't proven through fear. And it doesn't require you to disappear to keep someone else close. What remains now isn't anger. It's clarity and peace. And the knowledge that when someone says they're leaving, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe them. The strangest part wasn't the silence. It was how quickly my body learned it was safe inside it. For years, silence had meant danger. The calm before the next emotional storm. The pause where I'd scan every detail, his tone, his posture, the way he closed the door, to predict what version of him was about to arrive. Quiet had never been neutral. It was a warning. Now it was just quiet. I noticed it in small, almost embarrassing ways. The way I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. The way I cooked dinner without mentally rehearsing an apology. The way I could leave a glass on the counter without bracing for commentary. No eggshells. No mental spreadsheets tracking moods and outcomes. Freedom didn't announce itself loudly. It crept in and stayed. A few months after everything ended, I found the old note on my phone, the one where I'd kept count. 11 tallies. No explanations. No commentary. Just marks. Evidence that I'd once needed proof that my memory wasn't lying to me. I deleted it. Not because it wasn't true, but because I didn't need it anymore. People still ask questions. They always will. Why didn't you try harder? Why didn't you talk it out? Don't you think changing the locks was extreme? I answered honestly when I felt like it, and not at all when I didn't. But the answer, stripped of politeness, was always the same. I tried for 7 years. I talked it out 11 times. And the locks weren't extreme. They were final. There's a difference. One evening, while sorting through a drawer I hadn't opened in ages, I found our wedding album. Heavy pages, smiling faces, a version of myself I barely recognized anymore, hopeful, certain, convinced that love meant staying no matter what. I didn't feel anger looking at those photos. I felt compassion. For the woman who thought commitment meant enduring confusion. For the woman who mistook intensity for intimacy. For the woman who believed that being chosen required constant proof. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. Not hidden, not destroyed, just placed. Some chapters don't need to be erased to be over. The last message I ever received about him came through a mutual acquaintance months later. Casual, unimportant. He was doing better. He was working on himself. He'd learned a lot. I hoped that was true. But I didn't need it to be, because the lesson that mattered wasn't his. It was mine. I learned that love isn't a test you keep passing under threat of abandonment, that boundaries aren't punishments. They're information. That taking someone at their word isn't cruelty, it's respect. And I learned this most of all. When someone keeps threatening to leave, they're telling you something. Not about their pain, not about your failures. They're telling you they're willing to use loss as leverage. The moment you stop responding to that leverage, the game ends. Tonight, the house is still quiet. I'm sitting in the same living room where I once waited for the sound of keys in the door, heart racing, rehearsing apologies. The furniture is different now. The walls are a color I chose without compromise. The air feels steady. I don't wonder who's leaving anymore, because the only person I ever needed to stop abandoning was myself.